I'd like to welcome the Reverend Mark Nestlehutt, the President and Executive Director of Seamen's Church Institute, to the program. Mark, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, talking just briefly before this, of course, your marine industry experience began long before, but tell me about your introduction to the inland maritime industry.
My introduction to the inland maritime industry really began primarily when I started working with the Seamen's Church Institute about 4 years ago. And the vice chair of the board at the time was Mark Kanoy, who was the president, executive director, or actually was the chief executive officer, CEO of ACBL, and was very keen on getting me out into the inland marine industry. So my first trip was actually out to Houston to the ship channel. And then from there, I made my way out to Paducah, mainly meeting people in the industry, sort of starting with Kirby and Canal Barge down in the Houston area, and then Blessey, and then working my way up to the folks at Ingram and Marquette and Crounce and those companies. So that was really my first experience, and it was all done in the midst of COVID because my time with Seamen's Church began 3 weeks before COVID. I was actually in Houston when the rodeo shut down, along with everything else down there. And then I ended up driving my car all the way out from New York to Paducah on a road trip because nobody wanted to welcome a guy who flew on a plane during COVID, so that I could meet my staff out there and have a chance to meet with people in the inland marine industry.
Where did you first meet Mark Kanoy?
So I met Mark Kanoy when I was interviewing for the position at the Seamen's Church Institute. He was vice chair of the board and he was chair of the development committee. And he'd been on our board for probably 20 years. So I'd made a long-term commitment to that.
And you said you had some experience in the industry between the Navy and the Seamen's Church position. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Right. So right out of college, I mean, I grew up in Georgia, from Georgia, consider myself a Southerner. But I, right after college at the University of Georgia, who happened to be, two-time repeat as national football champions, I went into the United States Navy, hoping to fly planes. That didn't work out because of a vision issue that was developing with astigmatism. So I applied to be a naval intelligence officer and then spent 3 years active duty in the Navy before taking a reduction in force. But that was my first time really at sea for any extended length and my first time on an aircraft carrier. So enjoyed that time and really enjoyed the opportunity to serve and made a lot of great friends. And from there, lo and behold, I jumped into banking and took a job in energy, what was called production secured energy lending. Think of people who were drilling off the coast in tracts of land in the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico. And we were underwriting the loans for those leases and also for the drilling operations. And that was at the First National Bank of Commerce in New Orleans, Louisiana. So that was my exposure to companies like Schlumberger and Freeport-McMoRan and a lot of the supply vessels that were really doing supply runs and things to these offshore oil rigs. And then after about 5 years in banking, I took a buyout and went to divinity school, which is something I thought about for many years and thought even when I was back in high school, but it never really, the opportunity had not presented itself. And so after ordination and serving in parishes in Boston, well, actually, in, I guess, suburban Massachusetts and Boston and also in Chicago, I took a call to a parish on the eastern shore of Maryland on the Chesapeake Bay. And my time there was exposure to really the U.S. Jones Act mariners, because a lot of my parishioners were either Chesapeake Bay pilots who bring the big vessels up from the mouth of the Chesapeake up to Baltimore, or they were Delaware River pilots who bring everything in from Lewis, Delaware up to Philadelphia, or they were tugboat captains with Bouchard and Moran. And then I had, within my parish boundaries, I had MEBA, which is the Maritime Engineers Beneficial Association, which is a large labor union that trains ship engineers. And so a lot of those guys that were studying would find somebody and want to get married, and we do a lot of weddings for them. So it was a really great exposure to that really merchant marine side that I had not been exposed to as a naval officer.
Well, tell me about life growing up in Georgia.
Sure. So I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. My father had grown up in Atlanta, Georgia. My mother was from actually Eastern Tennessee, little town called Tazewell outside of Knoxville. So I spent some summers going up to a tobacco farm to be with my grandparents. In Atlanta, it was really a typical sort of suburban life. Um, my father was a CPA, had been an accountant. He started in private practice with Ernst and Ernst, which is now Ernst and Young, and then took a political appointee under the Nixon administration, and then stayed with the Ford administration, then came back for the Reagan and first Bush administrations. And my mother was really a stay-at-home mom when I was little. It wasn't until I went off to college that she took up a career in real estate. But growing up, it was your pretty traditional life. Came home, played with all your friends. Grew up playing the three big sports, at least when I was growing up, where we played football in the fall, we played basketball in the winter, we played baseball in the spring. And, in the summer, I played a little bit of tennis, but that was it. My father coached all of my team sports from the time I was 5 until I was probably 13.
Where did you study in college, and when along the line did the idea to attend divinity school come in?
Sure. So I grew up. My parents were very faithful and very active in the church, and it was a place that I always found a role, a way to be involved. It was a sort of an additional community, intergenerational community. Um, and so even when I went out to college, I didn't stop going to church. I might have been out really, really late on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning, but I still often managed to make it to church on Sunday, or at least to the campus ministry programs. And so I was always felt really close to the Episcopal Church and to the church in general, and had never really thought at that point about being a priest. Um, but when I later on in life, when I thought about what I liked doing, I really liked coaching. So I coached a lot of little league. I enjoyed sports, and I liked teaching. And when I finally did go to seminary when I was about 32, my goal at that time had been to be a boarding school chaplain. So probably work at an Episcopal boarding school, teach religion and ethics, coach sports, and probably be sort of in that kind of a role. Um, but instead, I went to the University of Georgia. When I came out of Georgia, I was an economics major with a history minor. I went into the United States Navy. This is in the right under the Reagan administration, with a giant buildup, a 600 ship Navy, and it was really an exciting time to be in the United States Navy. So quite attractive. I think Top Gun, the original Top Gun, was the best recruiting poster the Navy ever had, thanks to Ridley Scott.
Well, do you have any interesting memories of boot camp or your time in the Navy?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to repeat those because there's just so much profanity in them. But my favorite one was I flew down to Pensacola, Florida, for aviation officer candidate school. That's the one that actually has the Marine Corps drill instructors that run the program. And I was a pretty, sort of well-behaved, Southern boy going down there, and I, arrived in my Navy blazer and went to the training, and I arrived about a day early, or maybe 2 days early on the weekend. And so one day I got up, I was just in a dorm room by myself, got up, went out for about a 6 mile run and came back, showered, and was just standing there. And there was a knock on my door. And so I answered the door, and the guy sort of introduced himself and asked if I wanted to go for a run. And I said something like, well, I've actually already been for a run, but if you're looking for company, sure, I'll go for another run with you. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And he responded, "My name is Chief Drill Instructor, Master Gunnery Sergeant Barrett, United States Marine Corps, and I am not here to make you happy. But if you put on your running shorts, I will sure as hell make you sweat." And that was my introduction to Marine Corps drill instructors and the United States Navy.
Anything else interesting you can share, or is it all too profane?
Well, that was a cleaned up story. No, I really enjoyed just having that time. I enjoyed being on ship, but I also really just enjoyed the camaraderie of the Navy. I am one of those people who believe strongly that I wish we had some sort of national service, because I think that what that does is it pulls people from all areas of our country and different socioeconomic backgrounds, and throws them into a mix, and then makes them sort of live together and understand each other a little better, and have a common appreciation for the United States, and for a degree of patriotism. And I kind of feel that we miss that as a society.
Tell me about the first time stepping onto a ship for your first duty.
Stepping onto a ship for my first duty, I ironically was getting on board back in the day the USS Lexington, which was then a training vessel for carrier qualifications. It was home ported in Pensacola, Florida. And one of the permanent crew members, who was a lieutenant commander at the time, or maybe he was a commander at the time, was someone who knew my family and recognized me as I was coming on the vessel. But seeing him out of context completely threw me off that somebody could greet me by name getting on a ship that had, more than 1,000 crew members on it. But it made me feel, quite frankly, like it was a really welcoming environment, and I really, again, can't say enough positive things about the United States Navy and about the quality of people that I met in the Navy.
Switching gears a little bit, sir, please tell me about the history of Seamen's Church, because I know very little about it.
So we started as a mission of the Episcopal Church back in the Episcopal Diocese of New York, 1834. In 1843, we refocused our mission specifically to focus on seafarers in the port and city of New York. Back at that time, Lower Manhattan was the largest port in the United States. And all of Lower Manhattan was just ringed with piers and docks. And it was the center for commerce in the United States of America. And so we started operations working to try and benefit seafarers who were often taken advantage of by what were called crimps or land sharks, who would, basically ply them with alcohol, take all of their earnings, and then they would go back to sea, really being indebted to these crimps or to these boarding house owners and operators. And that was because as a seafarer, when you came into port, you didn't get paid until the cargo was sold. And so back at that time, much like really up until the 1960s, if you were a sailor or a seafarer, you spent about 80% of your time at sea and 20% of your time, 80% of your time in port and 20% of your time at sea. Now with containerization, we see the inverse of that, where you spend 80% of your time at sea and only about 20% of the time in port. So we started as a ministry to seafarers. We did all these sort of old-fashioned things out of a sense of noblesse oblige, trying to improve seafarers' lives. We built floating chapels that were on top of barges, where we offered, free services and religious services, and had those sort of moored, one on the East River and one on the North River, which is the Hudson River. We expanded into boarding houses that we operated for them. And in fast forward up until 1913, we built a 750 bed hotel that put all of our services under one roof. And that included, a bar, a restaurant, a dental clinic, a vision clinic, a medical clinic, an optician, a tailor. We operated post office boxes for 20,000 seafarers who didn't have a place to call home, so they could get their mail when they came to shore. And then we founded in 1920 the first ship to shore medical service, telemedicine service that we operated, which was later taken over by the United States government and then RCA, where we would actually have radio out from ships at sea, would radio into our building in Lower Manhattan. And then we had a dispatcher who would then patch them through to doctors and physicians on call in hospitals. So that was kind of how we started our operations. And so I would say really from the beginning, we realized that we weren't really about saving souls for an afterlife or converting people to being Christians or even, Episcopalians. We were really more focused on meeting mariners' needs and seafarer needs in the here and now. And so it was really service focused, everything that we did. And so this chaplaincy, this system of care and well-being later expands into, we opened a training facility in a school at the turn of the last century, about 1899, and then more officially in 1906. And we did all of the training that would help someone progress through the ranks, both ratings and then officer class. We moved into using simulator training, radar training after in between the wars. And we had a flying ship bridge that during the war period, the Second World War, we trained about 9,000 reserve officers and U.S. merchant marines who were the ones, moving the cargo ships and the convoys across the North Atlantic. And we also expanded into advocacy work. So if there was an issue that was impacting seafarers, and it was something where we needed legislative change, we would lobby at the congressional level and try and get laws changed to benefit and enhance seafarers' lives. So that's how we started all of that. And really from 1843 until 1960, everything was in Lower Manhattan. In 1961, we opened a large international seafarers center in Port Newark, New Jersey, which is still there, about a 15,000 square foot building. That was because containerization was moving ships out of the Manhattan area and over into the marshlands of New Jersey. And then in 1994, we expanded into the inland marine region, really at the invitation of a lot of companies who wanted us to bring professional maritime training to the inland marine industry, both to keep mariners safe, to make the maritime environment safer, and also I think to help lower insurance premiums for the inland marine carriers and operators. And so in 1994, we began exploring various locations. In 1997, we opened a large training facility in Paducah, Kentucky, which now has 4 Kongsberg simulator bridges. And we also then embedded that with chaplains. So we moved our chaplains out to the river system, and we have a full-time chaplain based in Paducah, Kentucky, who's a former retired Navy chaplain. His name is Chaplain David Shirk. And so that's our facility in Paducah. 4 years later, in 2001, we opened a similar training facility that's actually a larger facility in the Houston Ship Channel in Houston, where we have 5 Kongsberg bridges, 1 designated ship bridge, 4 either assist tug bridges or towboat bridges, and then we also have a Wärtsilä, the old Transa simulator that we use for mooring master training and TOPS classes. So we have a chaplain in Houston, we have a chaplain in Baton Rouge, we're hoping to have a chaplain in New Orleans, and then we have non-stipendiary chaplains who work for us in about 14 states and assist primarily with crisis response, any onboard fatalities, suicidal ideation, mental health concerns. We basically respond immediately, get on board vessel, do ride-alongs and deployments, and that's kind of what we're here for. So as I like to say, everything we do is to try and make mariners' lives better.
How different is the inland maritime industry compared to your previous experiences?
Well, the inland maritime industry and the U.S. Jones Act mariners who work on the inland marine industry are quite different than even the U.S. Jones Act mariners that you find that are doing blue water or deep water sailing. Most of the mariners that are sort of sailing, whether for Tote or Crowley or for U.S. flag Maersk vessels or something like that, typically went to one of the state maritime colleges or went to the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. So they're all coming out really more or less geared towards being officers in the ranks, usually coming out as a licensed third mate or third engineer, and then working their way up to master or chief engineer. The inland marine industry is very different because my exposure to it, often many of the people I meet that are crewing the vessels are high school graduates, maybe had a little bit of college experience or no college experience. And I think we're attracted to the industry because it's incredibly rewarding. I mean, it's both from the pay and remuneration to just the ability to advance quickly. There aren't a lot of industries like that that are in many of these states. And the fact that someone can come out with a high school degree, sign on as a deckhand or a mate, work their way up, and be in a wheelhouse perhaps in as quickly as 8 years, depending on the company and the needs, and all of a sudden going from starting out at maybe $35,000 a year, $40,000 a year, and within 8 years, have the ability to earn between maybe $150,000 to $225,000 is almost unheard of in many industries that require both not only an undergraduate degree, but often some sort of advanced degree as well. So it seems to me that it's just incredibly attractive, and the people that are attracted to it are looking for both economic stability and rewards, but also I think for a life that provides a degree of adventure to it as well. It's not like going and sitting in an office, and it's certainly not like going to work at a box store or a typical sort of industry that's land based.
Fill me in a little bit about your first time stepping on an inland tugboat.
My first time stepping on an inland tugboat, actually, the first vessel I ever got on was in the Houston Ship Channel, and it was with Buffalo Marine. And they do a big bunkering operation. And I got to meet Pat Studdert, who's sort of a legend in the industry, met his son Tim, and then they got us out on one of their best vessels, and we did just a big cruise on the Houston Ship Channel. And so that was my first time getting to really engage with with that sort of a crew on really on a towboat or a push boat. And then shortly thereafter, I found myself getting on and off a lot of vessels. Anytime I had the opportunity to go travel out to the river system, of always looking for an opportunity to get on a vessel because you always want to meet with the crew. You want to meet with the mariners because that's who we're here to serve. And you learn so much about the industry from the stories they have to tell about it.
Well, what does the industry look like currently and maybe into the future from your perspective, the industry and Seamen's Church?
Well, for the Seaman's Church perspective, we're looking. Well, let me step back a bit and say one of our learnings from COVID was that um, we had to change how we delivered some of our services and made them available to mariners. So much the way you now have a podcast, we had to move to creating sort of videos around mariner wellness and well-being because we couldn't get on vessels. Companies were really strict about letting people, third parties get on vessels because nobody wanted to run the risk of infecting their mariners and their crews. And so we kind of had to adapt to move to sort of a digital platform, whether it was, um, you know, trying to have a Facebook page available, trying to do call-in shows, chat rooms, videos, anything we could do to try and remain in contact with mariners during that time. And then also, one of the other learnings was that a lot of people left the industry during COVID, and people, if they were at retirement age, they often took the opportunity to retire. So I think coming out of COVID, what we saw is really a decline in the size of the workforce, and really a need to grow the workforce and to train more people for wheelhouse, which is what we do, to train more steersmen and captains, pilots in the industry. So I think from the pastoral care piece, COVID taught us that we needed to expand how we interacted with seafarers to various dimensions, mostly through social media and also through digital platforms. It also made us aware that there was a huge mental health issue that had been lurking out there that was exacerbated by COVID. And we needed to really ramp up what we were already doing around suicide intervention training and sort of mental health awareness and sort of what I would call well, what's the term I'm looking for? I'm forgetting. But resilience kind of training, helping mariners realize what are their strengths and how do they rely on those when they're alone or with the crew on vessel and out on the river. And then lastly, the training piece, realizing that we need to ramp up our training because there is going to be, or at least the industry is telling us, there's going to be a shortage of steersmen, captains, wheelhouse personnel, and really need to be prepared to train and even look at how we do training to sort of expedite that, which might require working with organizations like the AWO and also, of course, with the United States Coast Guard, who controls licensing and requirements around how quickly someone can get sort of cut loose to actually be in the wheelhouse.
If I may, how was Seaman's Church Institute funded back in the 1830s and now nearly 200 years later? How has that changed?
So that's an excellent question. Back in the day, we were funded primarily through well-meaning donors who wanted to support a mission industry within the church or a mission initiative of the church. And so we had some, what you think of today, a lot of donors who gave at the lower level. Back then it would have probably 50 cents or a dollar or maybe a $5 donation. But when we broke ground on that building in 1912 and then opened it in 1913, we have in our offices here, we still have the original founder or donor list for that building. And it has a lot of names like, J.P. Morgan and Cornelius Vanderbilt and the Astor family and the Bayless family and the Roosevelts. So a lot of people who were active Episcopalians or philanthropists in Manhattan at the time stepped forward and really, in wanting to serve seafarers and provide for seafarers, gave us the seed money to build what was at the time called the $1 million Seafarers Building or Sailors Building in Lower Manhattan. And throughout time, we've really benefited from individual donors who funded us at that sort of level. And also more recently from corporations who do annual sponsorships, annual donors to our either sustaining or supporting sponsorships for us. In addition to, of course, always appealing for funding from our donors who give at the lower level. Now that would probably be more like a $50 or $100 or $500 donation, in addition to these large, maybe $50,000 or $100,000 gifts that we receive from a few corporations and entities as well. And then also we apply for foundation funding as well. So it's a mix, and we've been able to build up a small endowment. And of course, we use drawdown on the endowment to make sure that we can always fund the operations that we feel we need to do. So,
before we wrap up here, you mentioned a few simulators in Houston and in Paducah. Captain Joy Manthe was my first guest for season 2 of this show. She made an effort to get herself into that simulator. Tell me a little bit about that, and of course, where you first met Captain Joy.
Sure. So, as I said, back in 1994, or really 1997, when we opened our first facility, most inland mariners had not spent any time on a simulator. And I think some were mistrustful of it. What can I learn from a simulator that I can't learn from being out on the vessel, being out on the boat, right? And it took a while for mariners to understand that from a company perspective, if you'd had a near miss or if you'd had a collision, you wanted all of your captains to know what happened and what went wrong. And it's a lot less expensive to run all of your captains through that same simulation over and over again than it is to have your captains make the same mistake over and over again on a real boat with pushing real barges. So I think that was the attraction of simulators. That allowed you to run simulations in specific regions and sections of the river where there had been difficulty, either near miss reports, NTSB incidents that were reported, and to be able to run through those and train all of your captains less expensively on being able to not make those mistakes, or to understand how to finesse those depending on current and wind conditions. Joy has a long history with Seamen's Church. She was a captain, and then at one point she was looking to make a profession as a sister, and one of my predecessors, actually hired then Sister Joy, who was also Captain Joy, to be a full-time chaplain with the Seamen's Church Institute based out of New Orleans. And she did that for a number of years for the Seamen's Church Institute, and then left and went back to, I believe, Kirby at the time, and now, certainly still works as a full-time captain, sailing when she can. Also, one of the great gifts she gives to Seamen's Church is we have this network of chaplain associates who we cover expenses for. We do all of their training, which is both CISM training, which is critical incident stress management, which is when you debrief after an incident, and then ASSIST, which is applied suicide intervention skills training. We provide all that training. Joy already had that, of course, having been a full-time chaplain, but she entered into our ranks of a chaplain associate, meaning that when push comes to shove, something goes south near where she is, our full-time chaplain, Tom Rhodes in Baton Rouge, can't get there quickly enough. We'll ask Joy or one of the other chaplain associates in the New Orleans region if they'll respond, while our full-time chaplain travels down there to accompany that person as well. And so she's been a great asset and a great gift to the organization. And as she probably tells you on that podcast, most recently she deployed on she did it on behalf of the State University of New York Maritime College, which is SUNY Maritime. They happened to do their summer sea term this year on Cal Maritime's vessel, the Golden Bear, which sails out of San Francisco Bay. And then they did their summer sea term sailing out to lovely locales like Hawaii, and then working their way back to, I believe, San Diego. And she did one of those legs for us, and probably spent about, 14 days maybe at sea on behalf of Seamen's Church, really providing mental health support and spiritual care for both the cadets the 600 cadets on board the ship, but also for the 100 or so crew members on the vessel as well.
Well, Mark, what does the near future look like for Seaman's Church?
Well, again, another excellent question. One of the things our board of trustees does is every 5 years we produce a new strategic plan, and we've been doing that for at least the past 15 years or so. Our newest strategic plan, which was just adopted by the board in March of this year, laid out 15 strategic initiatives for us to accomplish over the next 5 years. And one of those is really to expand our chaplaincy, sort of pastoral care, crisis response footprint. And so what we did is we had our chaplains look at the entire river system, then to look at where we have chaplains and chaplain associates currently located along the river system, and then to look at where we had the highest response rates for incidents and where we had the highest NTSB rates, reported rates for issues on the river and overall vessel traffic, because our goal was to make sure that no mariner is more than 2 hours away from a chaplain or chaplain associate, so that if anything happens, we can get someone to that vessel within 2 hours time of it happening. And we often get called in to these incidents along with the Coast Guard, usually by HR operations teams for these various operators as first responders. And so we're now proactively recruiting chaplains to join our chaplain associate program to make sure that we've covered the full river system network and also the Gulf Coast. And so what we look for are people who are already ordained. They're either ordained clergy or they're licensed social workers. And then we do the SCI and assist training for them. We teach them how to safely onboard and offboard a vessel, and then sort of what general protocols are and procedures are around being aboard a vessel, so that we can have this expanded network of what we hope will eventually be about 40 chaplain associates who will assist with that. So that's one of our big goals that we're looking to build out over the next few years. Also, we realize that, there are U.S. Jones Act mariners who do blue water sailing or Great Lakes sailing, and there's some opportunities for us to expand. So we're looking at Duluth, Minnesota, and Cleveland, Ohio for Great Lakes sailors, for bulkies and salties. We're also looking at the port of Jacksonville, which is a large U.S. Jones Act port for Tote Maritime, Crowley Maritime, American Roll-On carriers, which are all mostly U.S. Jones Act carriers as well, where there's a population of mariners who feel that we could, they feel we could benefit their mariners and employees. Because when we get involved with mariners' lives on the river system, it often spills over to the family. So we often encounter mariners who are not part of any faith community, and when something goes wrong, they might call us in to assist with. We'll do funerals for parents. We'll do counseling. We do weddings, baptisms for their children, all kinds of service to celebrate, sort of the more positive aspects of the relationship, in addition to the crisis response and responding to fatalities. So that's one of our initiatives. One of the others to make sure that we've standardized our training so that our centers in Houston and Paducah are at the same level, and that all of our instructors who are licensed captains are able to provide and have expertise on all of the simulations that we offer. So we have a library of simulations, and we're able to pull those, and each of the captains can run all of those. So that's sort of a standardization piece, and really making sure that we proactively collaborate with partners. So the work that we do with WCI, work we do with AWO, National Waterways Foundation, with the United States Coast Guard, that we leverage those on the inland marine side, and then that we also build our relationships with the International Maritime Organization in London, International Labor Organization in Geneva, and also with Congress, and again, the United States Coast Guard for what we think of as the international blue water sailing. So a lot of things that we're looking at and working on and working towards, but the ones that will probably benefit the inland marine industry the most would be expanding our network of chaplains, improving the training of our chaplains, and then also, I think, the work we're doing around our simulation training and expanding that. And then some initiatives we're doing specifically with Yale Medical School around our studies of mariner mental health and physical health and well-being. We'll be publishing one of those studies in the first quarter of next year. But again, looking at everything from free markers for diabetes rates, um, uh, congestive heart failure, mental health concerns. All of those will be evaluated by this study that we're doing with Yale Medical School. So those are sort of the exciting things we're working on, at least from my side of it all.
Sure. Well, Mark, thank you for all you do. I do appreciate your time this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Tim, and I appreciate you hosting me on your show, and I appreciate you sort of shining a spotlight on this industry and letting people talk about it, because it's a great industry and it's a lot of great people, and the more people that hear about it, the more people might be interested in it. So thank you so much.
I'm trying. We'll keep in touch, sir. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
You too.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.